Joe McConaughy, welcome back to the Single Track Podcast.
I'm back, baby.
Before we get to the race at hand, you had a great Instagram post the other day reflecting on all the changes and the turmoil in the world of athlete sponsorships. And some of the athletes will undoubtedly land on their feet and announce new partnerships later this month. But you had a really interesting line at the end of your comment saying, quote, "It's fun to see people push the limits of human endurance, less so the Instagram algorithm." Can you talk more about your thoughts there?
Hot takes. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, it's an interesting world, right? Because and that's what makes trail running great too. And what I'm talking about is the fact of, and just like the rise of social media and influence and quote unquote community and how that allows athletes to be professionals, right? So, the old model was, like if you're on an Olympic team, you get paid a lot of money, and everyone who's getting paid money as a runner is getting paid because maybe they'll make an Olympic team. And it's like, you got to eke out a living if you're a professional road runner. But it's doable, right? And then in the track or in the trail world, it's this kind of like unicorn of like, we're just like running to have fun, right? And that's kind of where trail running really arose from, with some big names in the trail space. And you get to where we are now. And it's like, okay, trail running is a more professional sport. There's more money in it. There are more businesses. There's a variety of services and premium products and yada, 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 yada. And as an athlete, you kind of get pushed in the direction to be like an influencer, right? Or to be really dialed in on social media. But on the flip side, there's a lot of athletes who are incredibly talented people and also very, very important in their own spheres, but they don't have the social media influence. A good example of this is Georgia Porter, who just won Mountain McDowell Friendly 50K, and she won like a year-long Salomon sponsorship. That was like their big, push, is whoever won the race would get a year worth of kind of like a low-key sponsorship through Salomon. But in their clause, they hadn't accounted for someone who doesn't have a social media account, right? And Georgia doesn't have a social media account. And I think when you look at, more broadly, if you're trying to be a professional trail runner these days, you don't need to be, big on social media, but if you're not on social media, it makes it a lot harder to be there in a professional capacity. And for me, it's a little bit of I don't know. I always am torn by people who push out a lot of Instagram content, because it's not natural for a lot of people to do. And in a lot of ways, I think it forces people to gravitate towards really outlandish personalities that maybe aren't exactly reflective of the community as a whole, right?
In your history in the sport, in terms of your relationships with sponsors, have you felt over the years an increasing, I don't want to say pressure, but encouragement to push the outer bounds of Instagram? Or are you still being encouraged to focus on your fitness and focus on what you can do from a performance standpoint?
It's mixed. It depends on which sponsor you're working with, right? And like, I know one of the bummers this year is there's like a company who positions themselves at like a really high performance and pushing the limits of like, endurance and what's possible. But their focus is going more and more towards like social media influencers, right? Which I'm like, those are like that's not the like, market you position yourself in as a company and what your products are supposedly geared towards. But at the end of the day, somebody who has, a lot of social media influence is able to much more easily get the word out there. And me as an athlete, I'd say it's something that it's just I think it really comes down to, what it really comes down to is the person who's managing that athlete relationship and what they're looking for. I'd say rather than like this industry trend of getting pushed in one direction, I think it really comes down to who the person is who's managing that program and how that person is being measured in their success by their bosses to determine like what athletes are getting pushed, in terms of contracts and requirements.
A part of me wonders how much longer we'll be in this era where athletes are responsible soup to nuts for creating their own content as opposed to just being the subject of said content. And there's going to be somebody, whether it's in the marketing department or someone that is like a videographer that they hire to do a contract with, it's all outsourced because my position's always evolving, but I feel like it's not necessarily bad to be on Instagram and to be putting content out. It's just most athletes in our sport, understandably, are not born and bred content creators. They're just great athletes, and they do have good storytelling capabilities in some cases, but they're probably not spending every single waking day of their lives wondering, how they can make this effect on a video better or how they can take this photo better. Not really a question, more a comment. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's one of the struggles, right? And why I think companies are always hesitant to invest in influencers, because it's like, okay, if we pay this person money or if we give them products, like, are they going to actually make content, one, and is it going to be like good content too, right? And that's just like a big X factor that companies can't control for. But I do think as social continues, presumably to get bigger, that will be something that's more done in-house rather than out-of-house.
I will say this though, and I'm partly stealing a line from a conversation I overheard a couple days ago, but I think you and I were in our early 30s. We're probably the last generation that wasn't like totally native to social media. And these what is it, Zers or Xers? I don't know what generation it is. Gen Xers. Okay. They're all native to it. And I had a buddy who was talking about TikTok the other day, and he's like, I logged on to TikTok and I fashion myself a content creator, but I saw all these videos of like trick shots and people just doing wild and crazy stunts. And it felt like the social media equivalent of me being in a horse and buggy and seeing the first Ford Model T just whizzing past me at 60 miles an hour. Like, these kids are at a whole nother level of content creation. And maybe the problem that you and I are talking about here won't even be an issue because these kids will be so native to the experience. It's second nature.
Kids these days, Finn. Gosh. Getting too old for this. Yeah. I agree with you though. I mean, yeah. But I also think it's a flip side where I think you have it's weird, right? Because I think there's some rejection of content creation. At least I know a few people who are younger. I know the kids these days. I know a few people who are younger who don't like that aspect of social media and who actively disengage with it. But yeah, I think there's going to be people who are just like we look like chumps compared to what people thought. I mean, even look at cameras, right? Because like if you look at the Run for Colin documentary that we filmed, it was like 2014, and we had this like Best Buy camera that was pink and it was on discount because that was all we could afford for like a documentary. And, and the production quality is horrible. And then you look at like a GoPro on the Arizona Trail, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like a professional quality. That's, so it's like interesting to think of technologies evolving and the people who are using those technologies and what they're used to and what they can do with ease that we take years to try to scheme up.
Well, we talked about it the last time you were on the pod. I think that your setup is one of the most brilliant setups that I can recollect among athletes in our sport. Like, you have some of your best friends are videographers, and all of your stuff on the Appalachian Trail, the PCT, the AZT, it's absolutely brilliant. And I do feel like that stuff is, I don't see a world where that type of craftsmanship from a content creation standpoint goes away. There's always going to be a need for that. And so if anybody's looking for a good example of what's out there, we'll link to it again in the show notes because it's great stuff. I still watch the AT one. Although I guess you did that with your GoPro. A lot of that's just your own GoPro footage.
But I always go back to that because I'm like, I mean, that was part of the comment, right? The one that you referenced on Instagram, where it's like, yeah, I think it's super cool to tell a story through long term, and long form content in a documentary. But of course, yeah, who are most people going to be able to make a documentary about themselves? Like, probably not. But that's where having someone who's kind of outside the box, who can craft and create a really cool story. Because, I didn't do jack for any of the editing or actually making those things. I just I've used a GoPro enough times that I know how to take dumb videos of myself. But It's really nice as an athlete to not also be responsible for all the production side of it, because I think that's how you really get the cool stories that come out, as opposed to these, like a 10-second reel that's going to, catch somebody's eye and get, a few thousand likes, but maybe lack a little more depth.
You have your guy. Brett and I were talking. Brett Hornick, the guy who I do like long run archives with, we were talking offline because we get a lot of inspiration from the folks at Sidious Mag, and we were commenting that one of our missing pieces is we don't have our own Mac Fleet, who's the guy that does all the videography for them. I think you got to have your video guy. Where's the video guy?
Guy. Yeah.
If you are, I guess we'll put a PA out there. If you are somebody with videography skills, you love the sport of trail running, you're a trail running nerd, hit me up, because we're looking for our version of a Mac Fleet.
There you go. Yep. If you love to work for this is not to say that you're offering this, but on my end, for my friend Michael Dillon, I'm like, if you're excited to work for free on a fun project, hit me.
Oh my gosh. Well, one other thing I want to talk about before we get to Bandera is, you have your foot in a lot of different scenes in our sport. One of them is the FKT scene. I saw that the FKT of the Year awards just got released on Instagram. What are your thoughts there? Did you agree with how everything shook out in terms of the rankings?
Yeah, I thought it's always such a funny, like I always laugh a little bit at the FKT of the Year, because people get really hyped about them, and I'm like, it's just this kind of low-key voting system on a bunch of objectively rad things, and you're trying to objectively rate who did the raddest of them all, where I'm like, if anybody who's in a top 10 contention for one reason or another deserves to win. So when I look at who gets first or who gets second or who gets fifth, I'm always kind of yeah, that's depending on who you talk to, you could make a great case for one person, winning or not winning. But specifically, when you look at the two, the male and female winner, because they rank the FKTs from a male and female top list. Looking at just how fast the Kunzel's time is psycho, right? Anyone who beats Killian, you're in for a pretty good day. And anyone who, on the female side, Andrea's time on Nolan's 14, that's a rad classic. So I always enjoy people doing really rad classic, outrageous efforts being up there. I also appreciate Josh Perry getting second. I think maybe, as far as the dedication and kind of structure of, hey, do you award, is the person who gets the Pacific Crest Trail fastest known time, or I forget how long it took Jack to do the, I think it was one a little over a day. I forget how long it took Jack to, no, it's 15 hours, isn't it? I forget how long the Bob Graham round. I think it's 15 hours. Yeah.
We'll get it in the show notes.
A single day effort, or a 50-day effort, 50+ day effort, which, objectively Josh Perry put in way more blood, sweat, and tears, and there was a lot more opportunities for things to go wrong, and he managed to push through a lot of crazy situations. On the flip side, Jack on the Bob Graham is just a psycho effort. So I'm yeah, you guys, basically I'm throwing my hands up and saying everybody's a winner to some extent. Because I just think it's really cool to see people pushing the limits in the way anyone on the list ended up.
If you have any intel, I'm curious, what is this Josh Perry guy's background? Because I think a lot of folks who listen to this are familiar with Heather Anish Anderson. They're familiar with Scott Jurek, Carl Meltzer, the folks that have kind of put their names, yourself, on the long trail FKT scene. But who's this Josh Perry guy? 'Cause he seems like he's kind of taken the world by storm a bit.
Yeah, he's a character. He's I don't know him that well, so I shouldn't call him hiker trash on a podcast, but I'll do that because he's just he has a bit more of an old school through hiking mentality background than you see in most people doing FKTs these days, which is really fun to see. He's also really young. So, he set a bunch of fastest known times. He's done a bunch of like very ambitious, like off trail routes that you won't see on like a results page. But
Okay.
he set the Arizona Trail FKT, Long Trail, Pacific Crest Trail. He's British. I forget exactly what he does for work, but he basically comes and dinks around in the US most every summer. So before he did, I forget what route he did in Death Valley, but that's what he did, like a big long route in Death Valley before the PCT this year. So he does a bunch of, he kind of like pushes the limit on like the hiking scene, right? And then he also is now really getting into the kind of FKT scene. I think he's also only like 26, 27. So he's still pretty young. Yeah.
Has he expressed interest at all in your Appalachian Trail FKT?
Not to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's on the back of his mind.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But what do you think about? Like, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's a very interesting world, right? And one that I kind of found myself in too after I set the PCT FKT. It's like, oh, I just set like a 2,660 mile record. Like, what do I do next? Do I go run a 50K? Is that fun? Or do I go do, so I'm sure somewhere in the back of his mind, at least this was where I was after the PCT. Ooh, that was fun, but maybe I could also do the AT.
Well, it makes me wonder, and this is kind of spurred more based on what you're saying about Jack earlier in these relatively shorter FKT efforts. Do you think it's necessarily the case that someone like Jack, who just took down a Killian Jornet record on the Bob Ground round, can someone like Jack, do you think, transfer well over to the formal racing scene, like the UTMB circuit or the Golden Ticket Series? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I imagine he should. Yeah. I don't know where he'd line up, but I mean, you just look at, I've like tried to research a little bit on like Jack's athletic background, and I feel like I always come up short with what I'm looking for, which I probably just need to listen to a podcast or like find the right source to actually learn about him. But I mean, when you're doing that in the Bob Graham round, he should be thinking he could, be top 10 at UTMB or competing pretty competitively in most race environments.
Right on. Well, moving to Bandera, to set the table here, you are one of the most experienced runners in our sport when it comes to near misses at Golden Ticket races. Correct my math if necessary, but I think you've had 4. You've had Bandera, Javelina, Sonoma, Gorge in the last 5 years where you were like so close to punching your ticket. When you look back at those performances, what lessons, other than trying to secure the ticket, what lessons are you carrying into this year's race?
Well, I failed. No, I didn't fail twice at Gorge. Gorge, I still got 3rd, but that wasn't Golden Ticket race. Yep. I've had a lot of Golden Ticket efforts. Oh, that was the other one. No, that wasn't the other. Was Sean? No, that was just 100K. Now I'm like losing track of my own racing history. You're right on the number of races. My takeaways, I don't know. One, like, it's a lot of fun. I highly recommend, anyone else out there, if you don't get a golden ticket your first time, go back for round 2, see if you can get it, or your 3rd or your 4th time. Because they're all great races and it's always stiff competition. And, it's where I'll often meet people that are kind of pushing their own limits. So I've had a lot of joy going after these races, even though I've come up short a lot of times. I've placed top 5 in all those races you mentioned, where you need to be top 2, and I haven't been top 2. So, I feel like I've learned a ton, right? Like I did like Gorge in 2017, and I was like 10 minutes behind Walmsley at the 50K mark and was like, wow, I could beat Walmsley. And then I pushed through like the 70K mark, and then I like died super hard and had a horrible finish. Javelina, I think I just went out a little bit too slow and ultimately probably just didn't quite have it on race day. And similarly for Bandera, I was 2 minutes. I was behind this guy, Tyler Fox, who was in 2nd place. And I knew I was pretty close to him. And people had told me I was within 2 minutes, 1 minute. I'd heard 8 minutes, 5 minutes for 20 miles. So I'd been running about 20 miles of the final 20 miles of Bandera, thinking I was within 1 to 8 minutes of Tyler Fox. And I never saw him the whole time. And I'd prefer not to do that again. So, I think ultimately I'm a very conservative racer when it comes to racing. I think there's a lot of like stupidity in how people pace themselves in ultras. But I think that may be a little bit to my own fault. So, I'm excited for Bandera and also coming back for another race for round 2. Because rarely do you do, the same ultra 2 years in a row, or at least I don't typically.
Well, I was going to say maybe putting your coaching hat on or your commentator hat on for a second, given that you've been at this race, it's come down to the wire for you here before. What do you think it takes to be successful? Like how should someone like you or anybody that's in contention for a ticket think about this course and in the field and how to be successful?
Well, if you can get top 2, that's a good way to approach a golden ticket race. So that'll probably be the first thing that's on my mind. No, the race court's fun. It's punchy. It doesn't have that much vert. It's sort of a runner's race, but also, at least last year when I did it, it was a little bit wet. So, you had mud that was sticking on your feet. And I don't know if anybody's running this type of mud where it, just cakes on the bottom of your shoe and then gets kicked up with every step. And
yes.
Yeah.
The worst.
So there was a lot of that, or some of that, not a lot of that. And then on the downhills, it's these kind of a lot of like loose rocks on short, steep downhills. So the race is a double 50K course. So you do the same 50K loop twice. The beginning of the 50K loop has a little bit of vert. It has a few 100-foot climbs. Then you have maybe 10, 15 miles, probably 10-ish miles of relatively flat running. Then you have a few more punchy climbs on the back, 7 or 8 miles, and then you do that again. So it's a really interesting race because basically what happened last year is I started out with Jimmy Elam and I were like, are we idiots? Are we like super one? Are we really not fit because we're so far back? Or are we like geniuses because we're the most strategic racers of all time and we're going to destroy everybody? But really, I think people went out last year a little too hard on the hills. They like slowed down. Like I caught the majority of the front pack just running on that flat section, not doing anything special. And then a few people had kind of run ahead and were able to hold on to leads and run pretty well through the next, 30 or 40 miles that I weren't able to catch up with. But it's a really interesting race because you hit some of that technical, climby descent type stuff. And you need to be good on those descents through the last 50K because it can be a big difference, right? If you're a little bit fatigued and you're tentative on these kind of like loose rocks on downhill descents, but then you still need to be able to run your, 20-minute mile pace on that flat section.
I saw a couple of weeks back, you ran roughly a 3-hour, 15-minute 50K with roughly $1,000 of climbing mixed in. So by my account, you look pretty damn fit. How are you feeling heading into this race?
Pretty good. It was a pretty chill effort. I just kind of went in and was trying to run. I've started working with Connor Holt, who's Camille Herron's husband. Camille's a stud athlete.
Nice.
You don't know who she is. And yeah, he wanted me to just run off heart rate, which was kind of fun. So it was a very controlled, good effort. It was like non-technical footing. So I feel like they're a little bit different efforts, but it did feel good kind of running a really cruisy, comfortable 50K, 4 weeks before going for a big 100K. So I'm feeling pretty fit, feeling pretty fast, and feeling like I can do a pretty good job, pushing pretty well while keeping it controlled at the same time.
For those of us that are watching the live stream on Saturday, around roughly what time should we expect you to cross the 50K mark, the finish of Loop 1, if you're running the race you want to be running?
Oh, no. Okay, good. I was like, at what time of the day? I need to look at what time the race starts. I was like, oh, no.
No. Like 4 hours. What's your goal?
I went like 4:07 last year and then came back in about 4:10, I want to say.
Wow.
And this year I'll probably go around 4. That's kind of what I'm eyeing.
Okay.
4 flat. I don't know. I go back and forth. The other thing that's changed is I can burp now. I've never been able to burp. And I got a procedure done that allows me to burp. So I'm like, Is my ultra running going to be revolutionarily changed? Or like, am I just going to be running the same, with the same ability level that I've been used to? So I'm a little bit excited that I could be coming in a bit faster than that, but I won't really know, I don't think, how it'll affect me until the second half of the race. So that'll just be a little bit of a wild card.
Are you taking a golden ticket if you get it?
Come on, Finn. What kind of question is that?
A hard-hitting question.
Of course. Of course I'm taking a golden ticket if I get it. I'm going to donate it to charity, actually. That's what I'll...
Hey, there's a wait list. They would love to have it.
That's true.
I'm sure a lot depends on what happens at Bandera because, again, like you said, if you get the ticket, Western States is in the cards. But is there anything else in the rest of your season that you can say with confidence you're going to be doing? Like we talked about how somehow you have not gotten into Barkley. Can you blink twice if you got into Barkley?
I unfortunately don't have the ability to blink these days. It happened with the Botox surgery for my throat as well. We'll see what happens for later this year. I do want to come back for the JMT again. So I do need, but you have to get permits for that. So I'll hopefully go back for that since Jeff ended up breaking my record. And yeah, if I don't get into Western, I'll see where I kind of change my focus because I don't know. There's a few different things that I've wanted to do, and that would kind of open up the calendar to getting after them.
Awesome. Well, Joe, always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. We are looking forward to following your race on Saturday and, of course, the rest of your season. I am holding out hope that somehow, some way, you're in Barkley this year in addition to Western States, but I guess we'll have to wait and see come March or April.
Just keep praying to the Barkley gods.